If you want to support the channel and get a great Christmas gift, then check out our Countries with Shoes pin badges. We have pins featuring our iconic design for every EU country, plus Russia, Ukraine, and the EU itself. Get one random free pin badge when you order 2 or more and use code NovoRossiya. The link to the store is down below. If you've been paying attention to geopolitical developments, or even just watched this channel recently, you might have noticed Russian moves on the Ukrainian border. But this posturing is only the beginning of what Putin has planned. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at Putin's new Russia policy, first proposed in 2014, and whether it can help us understand Russia's current movements in eastern Ukraine. So let's get straight to it. What is the NovoRossiya policy? Well, it was first mentioned on April 17th, 2014, a month after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Putin was hosting a question and answer session in front of a studio audience, and he was asked whether he would accept the US's offer of $1 billion to hold democratic elections in Crimea. In response, Putin first dismissed the possibility of a US-Russian compromise on Crimea, before going on to remind the questionnaire that back in the Tsarist days, much of southern Ukraine and even a bit of eastern Moldova, known as Transnistria, were part of Russia, not Ukraine, and at the time were known as NovoRossiya, which translates in English to New Russia. Now, this is, if nothing else, mostly historically accurate. The territory was won from the Ottoman Empire in the late 18th century, with the Treaty of Kukuk-Kainaji. Its name, which means New Russia, is a reflection of exactly that. So it became part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in the early years of the Soviet Union, and remained part of Ukraine after the Union's collapse. Now, this is obviously a pretty weak justification for an annexation. After all, by Putin's own logic, wouldn't Turkey have an equivalent historical claim to the area, given that it was ruled by the Ottoman Empire until 1774? We should clarify that Putin didn't explicitly claim that the region's history as NovoRossiya would justify Russian annexation, but he did imply that there was no good reason for it to be included in Ukraine. Referring to Soviet Russia's decision to give NovoRossiya to Soviet Ukraine, Putin asked the rhetorical question: why? Who knows? Anyway, back in 2014 when this happened, Russia watchers started fretting about Putin's new Russia policy, anxious that Crimea was just the first step in Putin's wider ambition to take back all of New Russia. Suspicions were apparently confirmed in August of 2014 when the term NovoRossiya started appearing in official Kremlin documents. In fact, one pro-Russian separatist, who in 2016 was revealed to be working with Moscow thanks to some leaked tapes, actually proposed unifying Donetsk and Luhansk, both of which were controlled by pro-Russian separatists, into a new NovoRossiya. However, a year later, Putin poured cold water on the project. Russian military activity in the region cooled down, and the defense minister of the Russian-backed separatist People's Republic told a newspaper in 2015 that the NovoRossiya project had been frozen. This was presumably because Russian separatists had failed to make the progress that Moscow had hoped for, in part because the conflict had attracted international attention and widespread condemnation. And this is how things stayed for the next 6 years, until 2021, when, as you presumably already know, tens of thousands of Russian troops began to gather on the Ukrainian border. And today, the threat of a further Russian invasion of Ukraine has sparked debate amongst the international community about what the appropriate response should be. Some analysts think that the West has to go for a zero-tolerance approach and be ready to use military force. Others think that it will be more sensible to attempt to negotiate some sort of compromise with Putin, or if that doesn't work, use non-military deterrence, like economic sanctions. Although it's worth noting that sanctions and harsh words from the international community have been relatively ineffective thus far. Now, which side of the aisle you fall down on here will in some part depend on what you think Putin's end goal is. If you think that he just wants to protect the interests of the ethnically Russian populations of Donetsk and Luhansk, both of which have Russian majorities, then you'll probably lean away from the military response. You probably think that it's not a good idea to risk World War III over Donbass. However, if you think that Putin's renewed aggression on the Ukrainian border marks a return to his NovoRossiya policy, then you might be more likely to advocate for a stronger response, Because if this is true, then what's at stake isn't just Donetsk and Luhansk, it's basically all of southern Ukraine. Essentially, if Putin's new Russia policy is still active, then a successful invasion of Donetsk and Luhansk will make subsequent invasion and occupation of the rest of New Russia both easier and more likely. Now, we should be clear that all of this is a long way off. Russia hasn't yet invaded Ukraine, and a similar crisis caused by a troop build-up in March of this year was ultimately diffused. And even if Russia did successfully occupy both Donetsk and Luhansk, occupying the other new Russia regions would be a fair bit harder, not least because it's only Donetsk and Luhansk that have ethnic Russian majorities. Nonetheless, if new Russia is Putin's end goal, further invasion of Ukraine would be a real possibility. And this should worry the West, not just because it will involve the illegal occupation of 45% of Ukraine's population, most of whom aren't ethnically Russian, but because the occupation of southern Ukraine will gift Russia significant strategic and economic advantages. Southern Ukraine represents 60% of Ukraine's GDP, and Donetsk alone accounts for about 20%, thanks to its significant coal, steel, and energy capacity. Control over southern Ukraine would also improve Russian influence in the Black Sea. The Black Sea plays an important role in Russian geopolitics because it's the only place that Russia can have warm water ports, i.e. ports that are navigable all year round. Russia therefore relies on the Black Sea, and specifically the port of Sevastopol, for exporting Russian oil and gas, as well as housing much of its army. And despite the annexation of Crimea, Russia has seen its influence over the Black Sea wane over recent years. Bulgaria and Romania have both joined NATO, and Ukraine and Georgia have both also declared their intent to join the alliance. Add to that, Turkey, Russia's historical nemesis, is apparently considering unilaterally modifying the Montreux Convention, which dictates the usage of the Turkish Straits. Given that Turkey doesn't look particularly keen on Russia at the moment, Erdogan's currently selling Turkish drones to Ukraine after all, this bodes particularly badly for Putin. However, if Putin can successfully occupy New Russia, he might be able to tip the balance of power in the Black Sea back into his favour. You get the point. Russia's troop build-up on the Ukrainian border could mark a return to the new Russia policy of 2014. And if Putin is indeed pursuing NovoRossiya, this would factor into how the West interprets and reacts to any subsequent aggression. So, what do you think? Should the West be worried about Putin's wider ambitions in southern Ukraine? And is the West doing enough to deter Putin generally? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And before we finish, remember if you use code NovoRossiya, then you can get a free pin badge when you buy any two in the store. So if you want a quick gift for a friend ahead of Christmas, then check out the store. And this might be your last chance for some Christmas delivery. Anyway, that's linked below, and your support directly helps our journalism. So thank you. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is in the description.